I stood in the shadows of the Chicago Art Institute, clutching a glass of sparkling water that had long since gone warm. On the brightly lit stage, my husband, Connor, looked every inch the visionary philanthropist. He adjusted his tuxedo cuffs and pointed to the massive screen behind him. "This sustainable housing project," he announced, his voice trembling with rehearsed emotion, "is the culmination of my life's work. It is my soul on a page." The crowd of donors gasped in admiration as the blueprints filled the screen. I did not gasp. I stopped breathing entirely. Those were my blueprints. I had drawn them 3 months ago for a private pro bono project that never left my locked office. He had not just stolen my work, he had erased me from it. And then, he smiled. I could not have done this without my muse, my co-designer, Destiny. A 24-year-old aspiring influencer walked onto the stage, taking his hand. The betrayal was absolute, professional theft and public infidelity, executed in a single devastating stroke. Before we watch their world crumble, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is standing with Claire tonight. To the outside world, I was the quiet, lucky wife of Connor, the charismatic brand ambassador who lit up every room he entered. To the American Institute of Architects, I was Claire, the youngest Pritzker Prize winner in a decade and the founder of Aura Design. But within the walls of my own marriage, those titles dissolved. I was simply the fixer, the silent engine that kept the lights on while Connor and his mother, Susan, played house in the mansions I built. I stood there in the dark, watching him bask in the applause for my work, and I finally understood the mechanism of my own erasure. There is a psychological term for what I did to myself, though I only learned it recently. It is called the competence trap. It happens when you are so efficient, so capable of handling chaos, that the people around you stop trying. You do not just pick up the slack, you eliminate the concept of slack entirely. I managed the finances, the legal contracts, the household staff, and the architectural drafts. I smoothed over Connor's 3 failed tech startups with silent wire transfers totaling $450,000. I funded Susan's position as chairwoman of the Beacon Charity with anonymous donations so she could feel important without ever having to fundraise. I overfunctioned so aggressively that I trained them to underfunction. I thought I was being a good partner. I thought I was holding up the roof. I did not realize I was actually digging the grave of my own marriage. By never letting them fail, I never forced them to grow. I became a utility to them, like electricity or running water. You do not thank the water for flowing, you only notice it when it stops. Take our home, for instance, the glass house overlooking Lake Michigan. Connor liked to tell guests he commissioned it for me. He would stand by the floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows, swirling his scotch, talking about vision and lines of sight. The truth was less romantic. I designed every inch of that house before I even met him. I bought the land with the bonus from my first skyscraper commission. The deed has one name on it, mine. But I let him play the lord of the manor. I let Susan host her bridge club there and pretend it was old family money. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself that because I was the strong one, I could afford to carry their fragility. I treated their egos like delicate glass structures that would shatter if exposed to the hard truth of who actually paid the bills. Standing there in the darkness of the gala, watching him claim my genius for his mistress, the realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. I had not protected them. I had created monsters. By shielding them from the consequences of their mediocrity, I had given them the audacity to destroy me. They did not respect the architect. They just liked living in the building, and they had absolutely no idea that the landlord was about to terminate the lease. I slipped away from the thunderous applause and the blinding spotlights, retreating to the relative quiet of the stone terrace. The Chicago night air was sharp against my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of humiliation I felt inside. I looked down at the city lights reflecting on the dark water of Lake Michigan, trying to steady my racing heart. I needed clarity. I needed to assess the structural integrity of my life before I made a single move. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. The screen lit up with 2 notifications that would change everything. The first was an alert from my private bank. A pending charge of $26,400 on my personal black card. The merchant was listed as Gala Catering, Rush Order. Susan. She had charged the entire cost of tonight's event, the premium open bar, the organic canapes, the towering floral arrangements to my personal account. She had not used the charity's funds. She had used mine, assuming I would just absorb it like I absorbed every other expense, mentally filing it under family donation to soothe her conscience. The audacity was breathtaking. She was celebrating her son's theft of my work while spending my money to throw the party. The second notification was a text message from the private investigator I had hired 3 weeks ago, back when my suspicions first began to form hairline cracks in my denial. It was a high-resolution photo of a document. A lease agreement for a luxury penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The tenant listed was Destiny. But the guarantor was me. Or rather, a forgery of me. Connor had used my financial statements, my social security number, and a clumsy attempt at my signature to secure an apartment for his mistress. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange sensation wash over me. Structural failure does not always happen with a bang. Sometimes, it is just the quiet, terrifying snap of a load-bearing beam giving way. In architecture, we talk about the blueprint of betrayal the moment you realize a building is unsafe, not because of age or weather, but because the foundation was poured incorrectly from the start. You do not try to patch the cracks. You do not try to reinforce the walls. You condemn the building. You accept that it is dangerous, uninhabitable, and beyond repair. My marriage was a condemned building. For years, I had been trying to renovate it, painting over the water damage, shoring up the sagging beams, pretending that with enough love and money, I could make it stand. But looking at those two notifications, the theft of my money and the theft of my identity, I finally accepted the truth. The foundation was rotten. There was nothing to save. The only responsible thing to do was to initiate a controlled demolition. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. I did not waste energy on tears. I simply turned off my screen, put my phone back in my clutch, and prepared to bring the whole house down. I walked back inside, moving past the ballroom where Connor was still holding court, surrounded by admirers who thought he was a genius. I moved with the silent precision of a ghost, slipping into the quiet coat check room near the entrance. It was empty, save for rows of expensive furs and cashmere coats that smelled of winter air and money. I sat on a small velvet bench and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim light, casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. I felt calm, clinical, like a surgeon scrubbing in for an amputation. First, I navigated to the donor portal for the Beacon charity. I had set up the back end myself, of course, to make things easier for Susan so she could focus on visionary leadership rather than administrative drudgery. I logged in with administrator privileges. There it was. The recurring monthly donation of $50,000, scheduled to process at midnight tonight. It was the lifeline that kept the charity solvent, the money that paid for Susan's executive salary, her first-class travel to conferences in Paris, and the lavish office space she insisted on renting in the Loop. I moved my cursor to the Cancel Subscription button. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a fraction of a second, not out of hesitation, but out of a desire to savor the moment. Click. The screen refreshed. Subscription canceled. Just like that, the Beacon charity was effectively bankrupt. Next, I pulled up the contact information for the venue manager, a man named David whom I had worked with on the museum's expansion project years ago. I dialed his personal cell. He answered on the second ring, sounding harried against the background noise of clinking glass and jazz. Claire? Is everything okay? I saw you leave the ballroom. David, I said, my voice steady and low, devoid of any tremor. I need to inform you of a security issue. The credit card on file for the gala expenses, the black card ending in 4098, is unauthorized for this event. It has been compromised. You need to decline the pending charges immediately. Compromised? But, Claire, that's the card Susan gave us for the bar tab. The open bar is running up thousands by the minute. She just ordered a rush on 5 more cases of champagne. I know, I said. Decline it. Now. If you run it, I will contest the charge as fraud, and the museum will be liable for the loss. Okay. Okay, Claire. I'm doing it now. I hung up and closed my laptop. The snap of the lid sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I could hear the distant murmur of the party, the clinking of glasses, the laughter. They had no idea that the ground beneath them had just dissolved. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked out of the coat check room. I didn't go back to the floor. Instead, I climbed the grand staircase to the balcony overlooking the ballroom. From my vantage point, I saw David weaving through the crowd, a wireless card reader in his hand. He looked serious. He approached Susan, who was mid-laugh, holding a flute of champagne and gesturing grandly to a group of donors. He leaned in and whispered something to her. I watched as her smile froze, cracked, and then shattered completely. She looked down at the card reader, then back at David. Her face draining of color, she gestured frantically to Connor, who was still on stage, basking in the adoration of his mistress. The demolition had begun. From the balcony, I watched the chaos unfold with the detached interest of an inspector viewing a structural collapse. The lights in the ballroom flickered and then dimmed to a harsh, cleanup setting, the kind usually reserved for 2 in the morning when the staff wants everyone to leave. The bartenders stopped pouring mid-drink. The live jazz band cut out abruptly, leaving an awkward silence that rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Susan was frantic, her voice rising above the confused murmurs. This is a mistake. Do you know who I am? Run it again. But the card reader beeped its flat, undeniable refusal. Connor jumped off the stage, abandoning destiny without a backward glance, and rushed to his mother's side. He looked furious, his face flushed under the stage makeup. What is going on? He demanded, loud enough for half the room to hear. Fix this. We are in the middle of a launch. It's declined, Susan shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at the machine. They're saying the card is invalid. It's humiliated me. Then, they saw me. I was standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at them like a judge from a bench. Their eyes locked onto mine, Susan's wide with panic, Connor's narrowing with suspicion. They stormed up the stairs towards me, cornering me against the marble railing. What did you do? Connor hissed, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. You canceled the card, didn't you? You're jealous because tonight is about me. You're trying to ruin my moment because you can't stand that I'm successful without you. Jealous? I repeated, my voice calm enough to cut glass. I pulled my arm from his grip. Connor, those are my blueprints. That is my money. And this. I gestured to the room below, where confused donors were starting to whisper, is my charity. You're crazy, Susan spat, her composure gone, her mask slipping. This is family money. You can't just cut us off. We have a reputation. I didn't cause a glitch, I said, loud enough for the people gathering at the bottom of the stairs to hear. I stopped the subsidy. I pulled my phone out and connected it to the venue's projection system, another system I had helped design and install years ago. The massive screen behind the stage, which still displayed my stolen blueprints, suddenly changed. It now showed a forensic accounting spreadsheet of the Beacon charity. Rows of expenses appeared in high definition. Consulting fees paid to Connor for work never done. Travel expenses for Susan's first-class trips to Paris listed as donor outreach. Office renovation that was actually furniture for her home. The crowd gasped. The murmur turned into a roar. That's? Susan stammered, looking at the screen in horror, her hands fluttering to her throat. That's private. It's fraud, I corrected. And now, everyone knows. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own greed. They were screaming after me, but their voices sounded small, like echoes in an empty room. I didn't look back. I had one more stop to make. I drove straight to the glass house, my tires crunching on the gravel of the long, winding driveway I had paid to pave 3 years ago. The house glowed like a modernist lantern in the dark, a testament to my skill and my stupidity. Waiting for me by the front door were 2 men. My lawyer, Michael, and a locksmith I used for sensitive commercial jobs. The night was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city I had left behind. "Is the paperwork ready?" I asked Michael, getting out of the car. The air here was cleaner, but tonight it tasted bitter. "Everything is in order," he said, handing me a clipboard. "The restraining orders, the eviction notice, and the affidavit for the forgery charges." "Good. Change the codes," I told the locksmith. We worked quickly. Within 20 minutes, the digital locks that controlled the entire estate were reset. The smart glass walls, which Connor loved to keep transparent to show off his domain to the envious neighbors, were set to opaque mode, turning the house into a black monolith. We moved the few boxes of their personal effects, clothes, toiletries, nothing of value that I had purchased onto the driveway. It looked like a yard sale for the damned. When Connor's car screeched into the driveway 40 minutes later, followed closely by Susan's SUV, they found me standing by the gate. They looked wild, their gala finery disheveled, their faces masks of terror and rage. Connor's tie was undone, his hair a mess. Susan looked like she had aged 10 years in the car ride over. "You locked us out?" Connor screamed, running toward me, his hands shaking. "This is my house." "I'll call the police." "Call them," I said, holding up the clipboard. "But before you do, you should read this." I handed him the document on top. It wasn't the eviction notice. It was the police report I had filed an hour ago regarding the lease for Destiny. "You forged my signature, Connor," I said, my voice flat. "That's not a lease dispute. That is a felony. Grand larceny and identity theft. The police are already on their way to pick you up." "And you," I said, turning to Susan, who was staring at the opaque house as if it were a tomb. She looked small now, stripped of her stage and her audience. "You act like you own this place because you're loud. You think audacity is the same thing as authority. But the deed doesn't care how loud you scream. The deed only cares about the signature, and my signature is the only one that matters." "You can't do this," Susan whispered, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from poverty. "We're family." "No," I said. "You were tenants, and your lease has expired." I turned and walked through the gate, the heavy metal clicking shut behind me with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. I heard Connor sobbing, a raw, broken sound that I had never heard from him before. I heard Susan banging on the gate, screaming my name, but I didn't stop. I walked into my house, my sanctuary, and for the first time in 5 years, the air inside didn't smell like their expensive perfume and cheap lies. It smelled like a clean slate. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. In the weeks that followed, my life became a montage of consequences for them. Connor was arrested the next morning at a coffee shop near the train station, still wearing his tuxedo from the gala because he had nowhere else to go. The mugshot was plastered across the Chicago Tribune, right alongside headlines about the architectural fraud. He was charged with multiple counts of forgery, wire fraud, and identity theft. The plea deal, his overworked public defender negotiated, involved 3 years in minimum security and full restitution money he didn't have and likely never would. Susan fared no better. The board of the Beacon Charity, horrified by the forensic accounting of her embezzlement, voted unanimously to remove her before the sun had even risen the next day. She was stripped of her title, her salary, and her social standing. The dame of the charity circuit was now a pariah in the city she claimed to rule. She sold her collection of vintage jewelry to pay her legal fees and moved into a small efficiency apartment in a suburb she used to make fun of. I heard through the grapevine that she tells anyone who will listen that she was betrayed by a jealous daughter-in-law, but no one invites her to dinner anymore. Destiny was the first to jump ship. The moment the news broke that Connor wasn't the owner of Aura Design, but rather a broke dependent facing jail time, she vanished. The lease he had signed for her penthouse was voided as fraudulent, and she was evicted before she even unpacked her boxes. She blocked his number, scrubbed every photo of him from her social media, and rebranded herself as a victim of a con artist. As for me, I rebranded too. Aura Design became Claire Sterling Architects. I gave an exclusive interview to Architectural Digest, telling the true story of the designs, the business, and the glass house. I took full, unapologetic credit for every line I had ever drawn. The industry rallied around me. Clients who had been charmed by Connor's schmoozing realized that the talent had always been sitting quietly across the table, doing the actual work. My billings tripled in the first quarter. I sold the glass house. I couldn't live there anymore. The walls were transparent, but they had seen too much pretense. It felt like living in a display case. With the proceeds, I bought an old, crumbling brownstone in the historic district. It had water damage, structural issues, and a sagging roof. But it had good bones. It was solid brick and stone, built to last. Unlike my marriage, it was something real that could be saved. I spent my weekends there, covered in drywall dust and plaster, stripping away the rot to reveal the strength underneath. 6 months later, I stood in the center of what used to be the parlor of the brownstone. It was now my private studio. The afternoon sun poured through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room was raw, exposed brick, unfinished floors, the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was mine. I walked to the drafting table in the center of the room. A blank sheet of blueprint paper was taped down, waiting. I picked up my pencil. For years, I had been drawing plans for other people's lives. Connor's fantasy of being a tycoon, Susan's fantasy of being a matriarch. I had designed palaces for their egos while living in the servants' quarters of my own existence. I looked at the blank page. There were no constraints now. No lifestyle brand requirements. No need to hide my name in the fine print. I was the architect, the builder, and the owner. I placed the tip of the pencil on the paper. I didn't know exactly what the final structure would look like yet. I didn't know if I would ever marry again, or if I would fill this house with children or just with art, but I knew the foundation would be honest. I drew the first line. A strong, straight, unwavering line. It was the beginning of a wall, or maybe a door. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was the one drawing it. The demolition was over. Construction had begun. If you have ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, share your story in the comments. And do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice.